Hey, Adele Bates here, Behaviour and Education Specialist, talking about perfection in education and working with students with behavioural difficulties. And in keeping with this theme, I was going to take, you can see my sleeping bag, I was going to take it down from the background, but I thought, oh no, embrace the imperfection. So this topic came about, I was the other day watching my partner work, and she is an architectural technologist. And these people, these crazy people, they have to spend hours, days, weeks on the computer on this software, Rivet, BIM, may mean something to some people, and they are designing buildings, and then the technologist side of it is also ensuring that the functionality is correct. So looking at safety issues, how the building is going to be created, what are the right materials that are going to be appropriate for the job, does it fit in with the laws of the country, what's the sustainability impact, what's the environmental impact, what's the heritage impact, and there's so many things they have to consider to make sure that this building is safe and functioning and going to work well. So I was watching her, and for about half an hour, I was reading my book as well, I wasn't just watching her. She was working on the same tiny detail, and to me, it looks so boring. And I said to her, are you trying to make that perfect? And she said, yeah, of course, that's what we need to do. Oh, and I just thought, I'm really glad that there's loads of different people in the world doing different things, because I would be useless at that job, because that idea of perfectionism, spending that long working on something, I just can't be doing with it. But it did get me thinking about this idea of perfectionism and where it might lie in my role with the students with behavioural difficulties. I think in general, my response was, it's really a good job that I'm not a perfectionist, because I'm sure we've all been there where I've definitely done this a few times. And for any trainee people watching this, please, share this advice that you make the perfect lesson, and you might have even found the perfect images and the perfect PowerPoint presentation, everything. And that guaranteed is the day that it all falls flat on its face because so-and-so had a fight at break time. Just guaranteed. I had a classic one once, actually. I spent ages on planning a certain lesson, got it all sorted, arrived, and one of the students had gravy in her hair, and this whole drama started because of the gravy in her hair after lunchtime. I think we've all experienced that. So in general, perfectionism can be actually really a hindrance, I believe, when working with these students, and also expecting them to have perfection. I think we have to be really, really careful with that, because so, for example, I work with students a lot with reading, and a lot of those students already have a history and a narrative about reading and their relationship to it. I work with older teenagers, so they've already been told they can't do it, they failed, that's not something they can do, they're stupid, they're thick, etc., etc. And part of my role, I believe, is to unpick that and to help them re-identify with reading so that they can actually even dare to give it another go. And that can take weeks, months, and possibly even sometimes years, really, to unpick all that's behind that. And if I were to come in and try and be a perfectionist about it, it would just make it even worse. So let's say I've got a student in, they've finally opened a book, they're finally trying to read, and they get maybe one or two words wrong throughout every sentence. If I was to correct it every time, it would just, I want to say something rude, we on their fire. So I just feel like perfectionism isn't that helpful for our students. And on a wider scale, this year there's been a lot in the press about mainstream schools, their exclusion rates, their off-rolling. The Timpson review came out earlier, so do take a look if you haven't. It is interesting. And from this mainstream point of view, there seems to be this pressure to get a certain amount of students getting certain grades, and then if those students, if there are students in that school who might not be able to get that grade, they are being sometimes illegally off-rolled and excluded. And again, that just feels like an unrealistic level of perfectionism being expected. And I just don't think that's helpful. There is one place, however, that I did feel like perfectionism, or at least strong self-discipline, could be really useful. Because especially when you're working with vulnerable students who've experienced trauma, abuse, neglect, you never know what's going to happen. You have to be in the moment. You have to be in the present to adapt to their needs and what they need. And sometimes that can be, they actually need to do some rote learning. They need to learn these 5 facts for my subject, and we're going to sit there and we're going to do it over and over again until they've got it. And sometimes being a perfectionist about that is actually really serving them well. They need that fact. They're in enough of a safe environment and headspace to be able to take it. And therefore, my expectation of them needs to be high so that I'm not doing a disservice to them. I've talked about this, I think, on another blog somewhere about tough love and boundaries. That perfectionism can be needed, but it's got to be as and when, and you've got to react to when that might be needed. And I think this also goes to our own overall approach to advocating for these types of students, because, I've definitely been there where I have been rejected by a student repeatedly for weeks, sometimes months, and the temptation, and it's such a tricky thing to talk about, but the temptation to go, actually, that student's probably going to reject me, and if I just stay up here, I can finish my report. That is a difficult one, because we are human as well, and rejection's hard. Even though we know why we're being rejected and all the reasons and everything, it can be hard. But I believe here, this is where the self-discipline, maybe we call it perfectionism, I don't know, is required to keep going, actually, and keep turning up for that student. And it does work. I have some fantastic stories I've shared with you in the past that actually keeping that tenacity, that grit to hold on and say, actually, I'm still here. I'm still offering you this. I want to get you an education. Holding that as perfectionism. I want to enable you to access education can really reap good results by the end. And it's totally, totally worth doing. So to recap, perfectionism in general, I'm feeling it's not really required in education when we're working with particularly vulnerable students and unpredictable students. And in fact, the ability to not be a perfectionist is probably quite helpful for our own sanity. However, there are times when keeping that high expectation, that level of perfectionism, can be really, really helpful, and to keep the drive and the progress for the students in their learning. And so I think the overall message is, as educators, we need the ability to work out when perfectionism is useful and when it's not. And we do that by being in the present moment with those particular students in that particular time of day, on that particular blue moon, on the particular, whatever it is, it's reacting to what is needed in the moment. And I think that is the key to when to know our perfectionism. So I'd love to hear about your stories. Of course, you can always get me on Twitter on Adele J. Bates. Always repeat it twice, Adele J. Bates. And if you haven't already and you're interested, I've got a free video series on how to manage challenging behaviour in the classroom, and also one for education leaders who are looking to support staff on a wider scale, support staff with managing challenging behaviour in the classroom. So if you haven't already, sign up to those. They're on my website. And I look forward to hearing from you soon. Tatty bye.